If you were with us for the last deep dive, you'll remember we left off right at that, well, kind of amazing moment. Bitcoin finally got a real world price, two pizzas for 10,000 Bitcoins. Pizza day. But, price is just theoretical, isn't it? It's a number until there's actual, consistent demand, real people wanting it for real reasons. So, what happens when this radical new tech, with basically zero rules, crashes into the messy, chaotic forces of the free market? You get the Wild West.
Yeah, this period, roughly 2010 to maybe 2013, was Bitcoin's real trial by fire. It wasn't just about testing the code anymore. It was testing it against human greed, speculation, and crucially, this desire to transact completely outside the usual channels, outside government oversight. It really pushed Bitcoin's core ideas, decentralization, censorship resistance, right up against the wall. People immediately started trying to centralize things, and, illicit trade became a big factor. So our mission today is to dig into this really paradoxical time. We want to show you how Bitcoin's fundamental design, its architecture, actually guaranteed its survival.
Even while the actual businesses people built on top of it, oh man, they collapsed spectacularly. Just ruined thousands of early believers. By the end of this deep dive, you'll get the inside story on the two kind of legendary tales of early Bitcoin. First, the rise and total disaster of Mt. Gox, the exchange that basically was the market. And second, the story of that infamous online marketplace, the one that really dragged Bitcoin into the global spotlight, for better or worse. Okay, let's unpack this wild ride.
Yeah, it's genuinely hard to capture just how much friction there was back then, architecturally speaking. Once Bitcoin had that price, even if it was measured in pizza,
Right.
users suddenly realized, okay, we need a better way to trade this stuff. Doing it peer-to-peer on forums was slow, messy, just not efficient. And that immediate need for a market led straight into this fundamental contradiction. People started building highly centralized companies, exchanges, right on top of this inherently decentralized thing.
And that just flies in the face of why Bitcoin was created, doesn't it? To get away from needing to trust middlemen.
Exactly. That's the core irony of the whole Mt. Gox saga.
Yeah.
You have to remember what Bitcoin was reacting against. Our normal banking system, the one we use every day, it's client server. When you check your bank balance, you're the client. The money isn't really yours in a physical sense. It's just an entry, basically an IOU, on the bank's ledger, a ledger they control completely. The bank, the server, is the master. And because of that master-client thing, every single transaction you make goes to a third party that has total control. They can freeze your account, block a payment.
Right, like we've seen in places like Cyprus or Greece, Venezuela, too.
Exactly. History's full of it.
Yeah.
People suddenly find the banks just won't, or maybe can't, give them their own money. That's the risk Bitcoin was designed to eliminate.
So creating Mt. Gox was like immediately recreating that same risk, putting your trust in one company again. Why did people do that? Was the decentralized way just too hard back then?
I think that's a huge part of it. It really points to human nature, habit. Bitcoin is fundamentally different. It's peer-to-peer, distributed, no central point of control. The absolute core security idea is brutal but simple. If you hold the private key, you control the Bitcoin, period. It puts all the power and all the responsibility on the user.
Which sounds great, but maybe scary for average folks.
Totally. Early users were just used to the old way, logging into a website, seeing a number, trusting the company behind it. They didn't want the burden of self-custody, of securing their own keys. They wanted the familiar feel of a bank or an online broker.
And Mt. Gox gave them that familiar feeling.
It did. And the origins are just unbelievably amateur, which tells you everything about how chaotic things were. Mt. Gox, it actually stood for Magic, the Gathering Online Exchange.
Wait, seriously, Magic cards, like the fantasy game.
The very same. It was a website started by Jed McCaleb, who, funnily enough, later went on to co-found Ripple and then Stellar. He built it just to trade digital Magic cards.
That is absolutely wild. A fantasy card trading site becomes the world's main Bitcoin hub.
It's the weird twist of fate. McCaleb saw Bitcoin's potential, switched the site's purpose, and then pretty quickly sold it to Marc Karpeles, a French developer living in Japan. And Karpeles, well, he somehow scaled it up to this incredible dominance. For a few years there, Mt. Gox was handling something like, estimates vary, but maybe 70, even 80% of all Bitcoin trading worldwide.
Wow, 70 to 80%.
Yeah. So for almost everyone getting into Bitcoin back then, Mt. Gox was Bitcoin. It was the market.
That level of concentration just seems insane. It completely undermines the whole point of decentralization, right? All the users were ignoring the core benefit.
Totally ignoring it. You had this single, incredibly fragile, centralized point of failure built directly on top of this robust, decentralized base layer. I also think of the dumb network idea here. It's key to understanding disruptive tech.
Okay, like the internet.
Exactly like the internet. The internet won because it was fundamentally dumb. It just uses TCP/IP to move packets of data. It doesn't care if those packets are email or web pages or video calls. All the smart stuff, the innovation, happens at the edges in the apps people build. The network itself just moves the bit.
Right. It enables innovation but doesn't dictate it.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And Bitcoin is the same idea, but for value.
Yeah.
It's a dumb network for value. It just processes transactions according to the rules, cryptography, proof of work, adding to the blockchain. It lets smart applications like exchanges or DeFi protocols get built on the edges. So the failure of Mt. Gox, as spectacular and damaging as it wasn't a failure of the Bitcoin protocol. It was a catastrophic failure of one specific centralized application built on the edge.
But because everyone had put their trust and their coins into that one application.
When it blew up, the damage was immense. It took down a huge chunk of the early user base with it.
Okay, that perfectly sets up the next big question, demand. You've got this incredibly shaky, centralized exchange dominating everything. What was actually driving enough trading volume to make it the place to be? And this is where things get, well, really interesting, maybe a bit dark too. The killer app, the first real driver of consistent demand. It was censorship resistance.
This is the core revolution.
The sources really hammer this point home that just inventing Bitcoin, mining that first block, it fundamentally changed the game. It created a way to move value completely outside the traditional controlled financial system. Suddenly, there was an alternative.
That ability to send value anywhere to anyone without needing permission from a bank or a government, that's the radical part. That the system just runs on math, on open source code, no one owns it, no one can unilaterally stop it. And pretty quickly, this attracted people and groups who were being actively shut out of the normal financial system. Sometimes for political reasons, and later, for criminal ones too.
And the first really high-profile example, even before the darker stuff, was WikiLeaks, right?
Yes. WikiLeaks is the textbook case of financial censorship. After they released all those sensitive government cables and documents, they basically got canceled financially. Visa, MasterCard, PayPal, even Bank of America. They all just stopped processing donations to WikiLeaks. Cut them off completely.
Now, when the sources say this was extrajudicial pressure, what does that actually mean? Did Visa get a court order saying stop?
That's a really important point. Usually, no. There wasn't a formal legal ruling or conviction. It was more about regulatory threats, back-channel pressure.
Oh, okay.
Governments or powerful agencies basically hint, if you keep processing payments for these guys, you might find yourselves facing a lot more audits, more regulatory scrutiny. Maybe we'll even take a closer look at your banking license.
So it's basically a threat that makes it too risky for the payment processor to continue.
Exactly. For a huge company like Visa or PayPal, the risk of that kind of trouble is massive. It's just easier and cheaper to cut the controversial customer loose. No court needed.
So Bitcoin stepped in as this completely uncensorable alternative.
It was the lifeline. Totally permissionless, pseudonymous, secure enough, and accessible anywhere with an internet connection. If you wanted to support an organization that the world's most powerful entities wanted to shut down, Bitcoin suddenly became the only way.
It proved the concept.
It absolutely validated the core idea. Money transfer should be like free speech, something you could just do, not a privilege granted by some gatekeeper.
And that same permissionless quality, that censorship resistance, inevitably led to its most famous, or maybe infamous, early use case, the Silk Road. This is what really put Bitcoin on the map globally and created that first big surge in demand and price.
Yeah, the Silk Road. It launched in early 2011, run by Ross Ulbricht, hiding behind the pseudonym Dread Pirate Roberts. It was basically an anonymous eBay, but running on the dark web, accessible only through Tor.
And known mostly for selling, well, illegal drugs.
Primarily, yes, although other illicit goods and services were supposedly available too. And for a marketplace like that, operating completely outside the law, they needed a currency that worked the same way. Something beyond the reach of banks or police.
Bitcoin was perfect for it.
It was the essential puzzle piece. This connects to the idea of money as a content type. A Bitcoin transaction itself is tiny data-wise, just a few hundred bytes. Instructions, signatures, no names, no addresses in the real-world sense. And crucially, the transaction data is separate from how it's transmitted. You can send it over regular internet, satellite, maybe even shortwave radio, theoretically. The message itself remains secure because of the cryptography, and anyone running a node can verify it.
But why Bitcoin specifically? Couldn't they have tried other things like digital gold currencies or even just mailing cash?
Cash is risky and slow for international stuff. and other digital systems usually had some central point of control. Bitcoin was different because of its net neutrality. Think about it. Normal finance is always making judgments. Is this payment legit? Is this customer risky? Should we allow this? It's top-down, paternalistic. Bitcoin throws all that out. The protocol itself has zero concept of a good or bad transaction. It doesn't care what is being bought or sold.
So how does it decide which transactions get processed then?
Pure economics. The only judgment is the transaction fee. If you attach a high enough fee, it signals to the miners that you value getting this transaction included in the next block. That economic signal, the willingness to pay the market rate, is what legitimizes the transaction for the network.
Wow, okay, so the network doesn't care about the morality, just the fee. Pay the price, get your transaction through.
That's the essence of its neutrality. And that utility, being the only practical money for the Silk Road, created the first really big, consistent, high-volume demand for Bitcoin. People needed Bitcoin to buy stuff on the site. Sellers needed to cash out their Bitcoin earnings. This meant people had to go buy Bitcoin, mostly from Mt. Gox. And that demand cycle lit a fire under the price. In 2011, Bitcoin went from like 30 cents.
30 cents?
Yeah, pennies, basically, to over $30 a coin in just a few months. Its first massive bubble, driven almost entirely by this underground economy. And that price explosion, plus the headlines about a dark web drug market using this weird internet money that forced everyone, law enforcement, regulators, banks, the media, to finally sit up and pay serious attention to Bitcoin.
Okay, so we've got this perfect storm brewing. Illicit demand driving the price sky high through this censorship-resistant feature. And the main place everyone's trading it is this single, incredibly shaky exchange built on a repurposed fantasy card website. That combination just screams growing pains, extreme volatility, huge risks for users.
Oh, absolutely. This period is where the raw technological possibilities slammed headfirst into messy monetary reality. The tech was revolutionary. Suddenly you could send value across a globe almost for free. Amazing. But the asset itself, the Bitcoin, became this wild roller coaster of speculation.
Because money is kind of weird, right? It's based on belief.
Exactly. We often say money is like a shared cultural hallucination. Its value only exists because we all collectively agree it has value, because we trust someone else will accept it from us tomorrow. With a brand new system like Bitcoin, that shared belief is incredibly fragile, especially early on. People were buying for utility on Silk Road, sure, but also just betting the price would go up. This mix created unbelievable price swings.
Can you give us a sense of just how wild it was? We hear volatile a lot with crypto even now, but back then?
It was a different league. That 2011 bubble I mentioned, going from under $1 to over $30, that was insane. But then, partly because of hacks and growing fears about exchange security.
Oh my Gox again.
Yeah, early scares at Gox and elsewhere. The price crashed like 90%, maybe more, within months, back down to maybe $2 or $3, wiped out. Then it did it all over again in 2013. Started the year around $30, rocketed up past $250, crashed, then went absolutely parabolic later that year, hitting over $1,100. Before crashing again hard, back down towards $200. Seeing the price swing 50% or more in a single day wasn't unusual. It was just Tuesday.
That kind of volatility must have been terrifying for anyone holding it.
Terrifying, yeah. And making it worse was the constant drumbeat of security problems at the exchanges, especially Mt. Gox. The sources make it clear. The warning signs were there for years. Hacks, lost coins, withdrawal freezes.
But people kept using it because it was the only game in town.
Largely, yes. And the fundamental problem, the root cause of almost every failure, was trusting things outside the Bitcoin protocol itself.
Right. Not trusting the math, but trusting the centralized company.
Exactly. Mt. Gox and others like it failed because they relied on traditional centralized databases for their accounting, often with terrible internal security, poor coding practices, mixing customer funds. They kept huge amounts of customer Bitcoin in hot wallets, wallets connected directly to the internet, making them prime targets for hackers. Basic financial auditing, seemingly non-existent. It was amateur hour, but with hundreds of millions of dollars at stake.
And this whole period really exposed that common misunderstanding about Bitcoin wallets, didn't it? People thought the exchange held their coins like a bank holds dollars.
Yes. This is so crucial to understand. Even today, people think a Bitcoin wallet contains Bitcoins, like a leather wallet holds cash. That's completely wrong.
So what is in the wallet file or app then?
Only keys. Specifically your private keys, and usually a record of your public addresses. The Bitcoins themselves, they don't live in your wallet. They exist only as records on the global distributed blockchain ledger.
Records called UTXOs.
Exactly. Unspent transaction outputs. Think of each UTXO as like a specific digital banknote or coin, registered to a specific address on the blockchain. When someone sends you Bitcoin, you receive control over a new UTXO linked to your address. When you want to spend it, your wallet software constructs a transaction that uses your private key to prove you own that UTXO. The transaction basically says, consume this specific UTXO, send X amount to this new address, and send the leftover change back to my address as a brand new UPXO.
Okay, so it's not like a bank balance that just goes up and down. It's more like constantly receiving and spending these specific digital notes.
That's a good way to think of it. And the only thing that lets you spend those notes, those UTXOs, is possessing the private key for the address they're linked to.
Hmm.
So when people left their Bitcoin on Mt. Gox, they weren't depositing money in a vault. They were handing over their private keys, the literal control mechanism, to this shaky, centralized website run by, well, not security experts.
They were gambling that Gox's security was better than their own.
A gamble that thousands lost, catastrophically. Because Bitcoin is like digital cash in this sense.
Yeah.
Lose the key, lose the coin. If the keys are stolen or the silver holding them collapses, or you send coins to the wrong address,
There's no one to call. No central authority to reverse it.
zero recourse within the protocol itself. It's like dropping cash in the street. Gone.
This incredibly high-stakes environment was a brutal but maybe necessary lesson in why self-custody matters. The system taught people the hard way. Okay, so we've got the two main threads. The Silk Road driving demand through censorship resistance, and Mt. Gox representing this huge, fragile, centralized risk. It all comes crashing together with the Silk Road takedown and then the final implosion of Gox.
Yeah, the end of this Wild West era was really defined by those two events happening relatively close together. The state finally caught up with the Silk Road, and the technical debt of Mt. Gox finally came due. The FBI had been investigating Silk Road for years. It wasn't easy. Tor, pseudonyms, Bitcoin, but it wasn't impossible. Bitcoin's ledger is public, remember. Pseudonymous, not anonymous.
So they could trace the money flow even if they didn't know names initially.
Exactly. They used a mix of classic undercover police work online, some pretty sophisticated blockchain analysis to follow the coins, and eventually, apparently, some operational security mistakes made by Ross Ulbricht himself. He was arrested in October 2013 in a San Francisco library. The FBI seized a massive trove of Bitcoin from the site's wallets and from Ulbricht personally.
That must have sent shockwaves through the whole Bitcoin world.
Yeah. Huge shockwaves. It proved that just using Bitcoin didn't make you untouchable. If law enforcement could link your real-world identity to your online activities or your Bitcoin addresses, you were still vulnerable.
And then almost right after that, the other shoe dropped. Mt. Gox.
Yeah, the Gox situation had been deteriorating for ages. Little hacks, withdrawal problems, constant technical glitches. They were papering over cracks for years. But the final meltdown came in early 2014. Suddenly, they just stopped all Bitcoin withdrawals. Claimed it was a technical issue with the Bitcoin protocol itself, something called transaction malleability.
Which wasn't entirely true, was it?
Well, transaction malleability was a real, albeit minor, quirk in the protocol back then. It meant the unique ID of a transaction could sometimes be changed slightly before it was confirmed in a block. But the real problem was Gox's own terrible accounting software. Their system couldn't handle this malleability properly. Attackers realized they could change the transaction ID, take the Bitcoins, and Gox's system would incorrectly think the transaction failed, so the attacker could potentially claim they never got the withdrawal and get Gox to send it again.
So they're essentially getting double paid because Gox's internal system was broken?
That seems to be a major part of how the funds were drained over time. It wasn't one big hack necessarily, but a slow bleed caused by incompetence and exploitation of this bug interacting with their bad systems.
So again, it wasn't a failure of Bitcoin's core security, but a failure of the application built on top.
Precisely. A catastrophic failure of accounting, security, and management at the application layer. So after halting withdrawals, Gox went silent for a bit, then dropped the bombshell, bankruptcy. They announced they had lost around 850,000 Bitcoins.
850,000.
Yeah, about 750,000 belonging to customers and maybe 100,000 of their own, worth hundreds of millions of dollars then, billions today. Just gone.
The devastation must have been unbelievable for those users.
It was life-altering for many. People lost life savings. Early adopters who'd mined or bought cheap coins saw fortunes vanish overnight. It cemented Bitcoin's reputation in the mainstream media for years as this incredibly risky, criminal-infested technically flawed thing run by clowns.
Okay, so let's put it all together. We have Mt. Gox collapsing, losing fortunes. We have the Silk Road bust linking Bitcoin to crime. It looks like a total disaster. The obvious question is, did Bitcoin itself fail during this period?
And the answer, looking back with clear eyes, is unequivocally no. Absolutely not. In fact, the chaos, the failures of the businesses, actually proved the incredible strength and resilience of the underlying Bitcoin protocol.
How so?
Because through all of it, the exchange collapses, the arrests, the massive price swings, the terrible press, the Bitcoin network itself never skipped a beat. It kept processing transactions, kept adding blocks to the chain roughly every 10 minutes. The decentralized consensus mechanism just worked, exactly as designed.
That unstructured simplicity was its strength. Nodes could join, leave, Gox could disappear. Didn't matter to the core function.
Didn't matter at all. The network doesn't rely on any single entity. Its robustness comes from that lack of coordination, weirdly enough. Any node that comes back online can just look at the proof of work, find the longest valid chain, and know that's the true state of the ledger.
And that relies on the idea of independent verification, right?
No.
Anyone can check the work.
Anyone running a full node? Yes. You don't need to trust anyone. You download the blockchain, you validate every single transaction yourself, right back to the very first one, the Genesis block. That block is the anchor, the root of trust. Your node confirms the rules are being followed.
Which leads to immutability. Once a transaction is buried under enough blocks, enough proof of work, it's basically set in stone. Can you explain why that energy cost makes it so secure?
Yeah, the immutability isn't magic. It's pure economics and physics. When miners add a block to the chain, they spend a huge amount of computational energy, real-world electricity, solving that cryptographic puzzle. That expended energy is like setting the transaction in digital concrete. To change a transaction that's, say, 6 blocks deep, an attacker would have to secretly redo all the work for those 6 blocks, plus catch up to the main chain.
They'd need more computing power than the rest of the entire network combined.
Exactly. They'd need to execute a 51% attack. And the cost to acquire and run that much specialized hardware and consume that much electricity is just astronomical. It gets more expensive as the network grows. So the history becomes practically unchangeable because it's prohibitively expensive to rewrite it.
So even when Gox lost 850,000 bitcoins, those transactions weren't reversed on the blockchain. The chain just kept going.
The blockchain recorded the transactions that moved coins out of Gox's control. Whether Gox intended them or not, the protocol executed valid instructions signed by the keys Gox held. The ledger was accurate. Gox's internal management was the failure. The network didn't care about Gox's bankruptcy. It just kept confirming valid transactions.
In this whole story, the chaos, the criticism, but the underlying network surviving it really echoes how other disruptive technologies developed, doesn't it? Like the internet scaling debates.
Oh, it's a perfect parallel. The sources really lean into this. Think about the early internet. Experts constantly predicted its collapse. It'll never handle email attachments. The World Wide Web is too slow. It'll crash. Streaming video, impossible.
They focused on the limitations of the early tech, not the potential value.
Exactly. They mistook the clunky, slow, early medium for the revolutionary message, permissionless global communication. Critics of Bitcoin did the same thing. The block size is too small. It can't handle the Silk Road volume. It'll never scale.
Focusing on the transaction throughput, not the censorship resistance or the peer-to-peer nature.
Right. And the famous saying captures it perfectly. Bitcoin has been failing to scale gracefully for 25 years, just like the internet, meaning it always seems inadequate for the next big thing people want to do with it, but it somehow manages to scale enough for what people are currently doing. That's classic disruptive innovation.
So the huge takeaway from this whole Wild West period, from Mt. Gox to Silk Road, is that despite the absolute mayhem on the surface, the core Bitcoin protocol proved itself. It was tested under extreme conditions, and it didn't break.
It never stopped, never halted, never censored. The consensus worked. The energy secured the ledger. It was an incredibly painful, chaotic, but maybe totally necessary childhood.
Yeah, a brutal learning curve.
Bitcoin got tested by crime, by pure greed, by incompetence. It showed the world what censorship resistance actually meant in practice, for good and ill. And it delivered a very expensive, unforgettable lesson about security, centralization risks, and the absolute necessity of self-custody. Not your keys, not your coins. The Gox failure really hammered that home. If you trust a third party with your keys, you inherit their risks. The only thing you should ultimately trust is the math, the code, the verified blockchain itself. The Wild West burned away a lot of misconceptions.
And that hard-won understanding, trusting the protocol over the people, that really paved the way for the next phase, didn't it?
It had to. Bitcoin survived, yes. But the Silk Road bust, the Gox collapse, that put Bitcoin squarely on the map for every regulator and law enforcement agency on the planet. The days of flying completely under the radar were definitely over. The party, in that sense, was ending.
A chaotic, messy, but resilient beginning. The core tech worked, even when the businesses failed.
Okay, so next time, we dive into what happened next. The regulatory battles begin. Legitimate companies start trying to build serious infrastructure on top of this proven, resilient base layer. We start seeing real innovation in the gaps. Things like payment channels emerge trying to solve problems traditional finance couldn't touch. The effort to tame the Wild West begins.
Exactly. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into Bitcoin's wild early days. We'll see you next time as Bitcoin starts to grow up, reluctantly perhaps, into the age of regulation and mainstream attention.